Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks very much indeed for stopping by the channel. And yep, today we've got our first real head-to-head battle and straight-up model comparison. It is indeed handbags at dawn for our duelists, the Oris and the Christopher Ward. So essentially the two models that we're looking at, I'll chuck them out of the box in 1 second. We've got the Oris 65, it's the newer 42mm version, and that's in the one corner. And in the black corner, we've then got the stalwart Christopher Ward C65 Trident. So let me just pop them out of the box. Alright, so here are our two watch beauties for today. A very, very reflective Oris 65 there. And then its opponent this evening is going to be the Christopher Ward Trident. So these two have been lent into the channel, so just wanted to obviously give a massive thanks out to our lender today, and just wanted to say as well, wish you all the best with that hip operation. Hope it goes splendidly. So as this is kind of a head-to-head, the other thing that I wanted to do is just to try and compare the models. So I did like a little bit of a crib sheet, if you were, just to sort of look at the talking points around the watches as a way, I suppose, to highlight the defining aspects, and then perhaps to try and draw a conclusion at the end as to which one might be the winner. Let me just see if I can situate that there a little bit in the center, and then focus on the watches. So kicking off with the shinier Oris. So it's picking up a little bit of light reflection there. Let's see if I can get it on one side. There we go. So yeah, give you a quick overview of the watch just as I'm rambling along here. The watch then, the Oris then, is 42 mils across, whereas our competitor then this evening, being the Christopher Ward, is 41 mils across. A significant, very significant difference, as you can see at the top there, is that the Oris is 50 mils north to south, whereas the Chris Ward is 47 mils. And you can see here how quite much more elongated the Oris is. Let me just put one on top of the other. Just put a cloth between the two. So yeah, so we've got the Oris on the top, Chris Ward on the bottom, and you can see there significantly. Yeah, I mean it's 3 mils, but actually on wrist that translates into something quite substantial. I think that longer Oris wrist print is going to put a couple of people off. However, the next category we've got is deep dish or thin and crispy, and both of them, you know, there's a mil difference between the two of them. I think both managed to keep that at a perfect depth, specifically for this style of watch. Our next category then is luggage. Oris have fallen into the trap of making it bespoke at 21. I just don't get why they don't do 20s and 22s and things like that. Whereas the Chris Ward then is at 22. Little observation here though, that I do wonder if the 22s on this 41 mil diameter do make the watch actually quite squat and thick in that sense, almost making it a little bit squarer than it is rounder. So I'm wondering if they'd swap that out to a 20, it might have made it a little bit more elongated in that sense. Watery goodness. So this is an odd one. So the Chris Ward is a 150 meter watery, and then the Oris is 100. Now, admittedly, I don't think either of these two are going to be being used as anything other than desk divers. But the other curious aspect to it is that the Oris then has a screw down crown, only gives you the 100. Whereas the Chris Ward has a push me, pull me crown, and it gives you that additional 150 meters worth of resistance. Go figure. But as I say, I don't think it's a defining factor, the watery goodness on either of these two. The next thing we've got on the spec list then is the crown. Both of them are signed. And yeah, both of them have got, you know, pretty standard knurling on them, very manageable in both cases, and a similar sort of diameter on the crowns also. there is a lack of crown guards as well. I suppose that's the only other thing that I would mention, but I don't think again that's going to kill the conversation at all. Up top, as I alluded to at the beginning, so the that sloped dome on the Oris, I mean, it's so pronounced. It's so dominant, as you can see it there. It really does slope up. It's not a box in that sense, and as I say, it provides monstrous distortion on the dial. It's almost impossible to take photos of the damn thing without it picking up light from somewhere. So if that's the kind of vintage appeal that you're going for from that sapphire, then you've got all your boxes ticked. The Chris Ward, in comparison, is a little bit boxier as it stands up, and as you can see, far less dominant. And far less distortion as well. There's a little bit of blue from the AR here, but it's a very, very, very different impact created by the sapphires. All right, and on to our next category. We've got rear view mirror. And as you'll see here, the case back, I think I just popped it on screen a little bit earlier. So this one is obviously then from the Oris. And it's pretty basic and uninspiring. I've got to say, I was a little bit let down when I saw that. Okay, yeah, it's fit for purpose. It tells you some information on there, and many people don't bother looking at the case back, so you could argue that it is, all okay. However, you then bring up the Chris Ward, the Trident, and you see that to me is a case back. You've got that fantastic press design there of the Trident head. It's just much more of something to look at. I mean, okay, you could look at it once or twice, you're never going to need to see it again in that sense, but I just think attention to detail is much nicer on this one. Next up, we've got category of the Twitcher's Paradise. The Twitcher's Paradise, then, each one both features an aluminium 120 bezel on these. Action on the Oris sounds like this. So it's quite soft, quite smooth, moves very easily, and there's good purchase on it. I think you can see the cuttings into that bezel, are quite pronounced. Camera's losing it. There we go. Keeps wanting to focus on my finger. Let's try then the Chris Ward by comparison. So it's got the matte black on that dialed, on the bezel finish on the top. Much finer coin, it's be almost less than a coin edge on here. Action sounds like this. So much louder, the bezel is much stiffer, but then as a consequence, because it's so much shallower, it's actually not that easy to get purchase on this. Your fingers are going to be catching on something. It stops there at the top on the lugs. So again, I don't imagine that either of these two are going to be used for precision timings or anything like that. Sorry, let me just get my OCD, get these back up to the 12. They're not going to be used for precision timing. So imagine your standard stuff, boiling your egg or something like that. It's going to work absolutely fine. Other observations, it's so difficult to get the Oris without any reflection. But as you can see here, there's a significant amount of wiggle as it sits in its in its indentation. It really does move quite a lot. The Chris Ward also wiggles a little bit, but it's significantly less. There is a little bit of movements, but it's much less. So yeah, I mean, I suppose the only other difference I would highlight is that obviously the Oris bezel is a little bit busier there with those minute markings, and then obviously it's much thicker as well. This one on the Chris Ward is much subtler, much thinner dimensions around the diameter to it. Not really sure about which one I actually prefer on those two, I have to say. Next category then we've got is Lume Junkies. Now both of them feature Superluminova Old Radium. Oddly, and I say this is very oddly, the Oris is much quicker to respond to light changes. The Chris Ward, as you can see here, it's okay. It's certainly fit for purpose, but it does take a lot longer to it needs more light in order to charge it up, which I thought was a little bit odd. I have to say that on both of them, the finishing and the depth, or the application of the loom, is not brilliant. The Chris Ward then has the Twix markers up at the 12, just helping you to distinguish, which way up the watch is. But the loom stripe on the seconds hand on the Chris Ward absolutely vanishes. It really isn't applied, heavily enough. And also the the bars at the 3 and the 9, as you can see, also because they're so slim. Again, they really do. The loom is very weakly applied. Now, again, you could argue that having those markers at the 3 and the 9 much smaller, again, help you orient the watch. Okay, I get that, but it just seems to be a little bit weak. Whereas on the Oris, by contrast, the hands, it's like they've put triple the amount of loom on the hands in comparison to what they have done on the on the markers themselves. It almost again seems like the little loom pip up at the top again seems to be a little bit stronger. Again, I had to bring in the Kuriburi here because I was looking at both of them in the dark, and I'm just like, this isn't brilliant. And the Kuriburi, as you can see, it just stands out positive blue, and it's that same super luminova. Okay, admittedly, it's not the old radium. So I guess what they're doing is going for something a little bit more retro. I have to say I was a little bit underwhelmed considering the price point on both of these. All right, our next category then is what day is it? The date window. So you can see the date window over here on the Oris is white and got a little bit of a frame around it. And then the Chris Ward, in comparison, okay, just a little bit of chamfered edge on there, but very small. But they have at least color coded the date wheel, which I think makes a big difference. Again, just putting the two next to each other, I think you can see that the Chris Ward looks far nicer in that sense. That white, it just looks out of place to me on the Oris again, but that's just my personal taste. Next one is an odd one. So the movement. So in the Oris, then we've got the Oris 733 movement, which is essentially it's kind of a derivative. It's a base of a movement called the SW201 2-1, which is the same movement then you find in the Chris Ward. Now this sort of leads into my conclusions around the watches, and that is around price point. So okay, I think it's a bit of a common complaint actually with the Oris is that movement, I mean, entirely fit for purpose. It's going to last. It's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with it. But the issue is the impact on price. You can find that SW200-1 in much cheaper watches, even cheaper than the Chris Ward. So the additionality that's being expressed or represented in the Oris, I think, as we'll see, as it comes up in a little bit in later categories, big question to me around that. Next category is on weight. They pretty much weigh the same. You swap these out onto leather, steel, or something like that. It's there's again not arguable. Separate specific difference there. Heritage and brand identity. Well, I mean, Oris has got it by the bucket load, hasn't it? Really. However, I think that Chris Ward, they're a newish brand, but they certainly do pack a mighty punch. And then lastly, so backup. So Oris only give you a 2-year warranty, whereas Chris Ward are confident and extend that out to 5 years. And how spendy. Yeah, so retail price for the Oris is $1,550, whereas the Chris Ward comes in at $740. Okay, so yeah, all right. Let's just move on to something else because I'll touch on that in the in the conclusion. So just a couple of additional shots for you here. I mean, the blue on the Oris, it's such a dark blue. you know, in certain lights it disappears, but then out in the sunshine, I mean, it just absolutely pops, and it almost seems to be a little bit too strong of a blue to match with the black of the bezel. The Chris Ward on the reverse, actually, depending on the light that you catch it, the black dial actually almost comes up like a little bit of a grey. I think as well that the Chris Ward dial is much more subtle, but it does have that additional branding at the 9 o'clock, which irks many people. Whereas I think the Oris dial is much bolder and clearer. The hands, curiously, on both are quite similar, with the Oris having a little bit of a pointy end on the hands, the second hand having that midpoint lollipop, whereas the Chris Ward has got that fantastic, lovely little cool trident counterbalance. The Oris case body as well, for me, I actually like it more. I think it's got much more presence. You can see as well here, just at the bottom, you've got a little bit of detail on those lugs, and those lugs really do dominate. They really stand out. You know, the streamlined aspect on them, whereas I think, yeah, the lugs on the Chris Ward, you know, a little stubbier and a little bit more, yeah, they're just smaller in that sense. And so, yeah, curious design differences, as I say. My preference on that, I think maybe the Chris Ward is probably, maybe it's a little bit more modest. I mentioned the flanks on the sides. The Oris, yeah, it's much, yeah, almost streamlined in that sense. You know, very smooth, pleasant curve to it. Whereas the Chris Ward plays with something quite different. You know, they've got a mix of brushing, polishing there. And I think what that does is that actually thins the visual impact or aspect of the watch. Both of them at the moment are then on stock straps. The Chris Ward on this rubber. I like it because it's thick all the way along and holds the watch on wrist much more comfortably. However, I have to say that on wrist, actually, this section's here actually press into the side of the wrist, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. So easy fix, you swap it out. Whereas the Oris has got much more of a tapered strap going on here in this Tropic. To me, it's a little bit thin, especially when you think the size of the wrist print of the head there. I just prefer my straps thicker. Again, that's a nice easy fix. It may be as well that the Chris Ward by the current owner is not fully broken in. Maybe that might change it. So if we were to then come back to our sort of, you know, overall spec list, and, you know, could we decide from a winner between the two? Well, for me, it's a toughie. Well, it's not really. That's an absolute lie. The Chris Ward would win, and simply it wins on price. My watch budget, doesn't stretch to £1,500 for a watch, and if it did, and I'm struggling to justify that what you get in the Oris is double the value or double the price of the Chris Ward. There are aspects of the Oris that are slightly more refined, but if I'm going to spend that much money on a watch, I want to be wowed. And whilst this is a very cool watch, it doesn't wow me. The Chris Ward, I mean, it's clean, it's simple, it's nice, and I think you sort of, again, it's that question of price, isn't it? You know, you're getting something very similar. Admittedly, you're not getting the heritage and all the other bits and pieces. You know, it's not their own brand movement. This one is kind of a little bit theirs, but they've based it on the movement that's in that one. The current owner of both of these, you know, seems to agree with me. He also can't really spot the price difference justification. I get with many brands that you're paying a goodwill percentage of the price for the brand heritage, etc., but that's not doing enough to persuade me. Others in this category that you might want to consider if you're looking at these style of watches, we've got the beautiful Baltic Aquascaphe. It's cheaper than both of these, it's bluer than both of these, and it's, to my eyes, it's absolutely delicious. I really want to get my hands on one of those or own one. Another alternative, if you want some Jaws movie heritage, you've got the Nautascaphe, very odd name, from the recently revived brand All-Star. And lastly, another option that might be taking it a step up, certainly within price, then is the Longines Heritage Skin Diver. Very, very classy watch indeed. But anyway, guys, over to you. What do you reckon? Does the Oris warrant that price tag, or would you be more tempted by the Chris Ward or one of the alternatives that I've suggested, or another one that I've completely forgotten? Anyway, thanks as always for your time, your view, and of course, thanks again to our channel buddy for lending these in. Again, best of luck with that operation. And of course, until next time, this is your host, the Bombardier, signing off. Cheers, guys.